take her money. She only helps so she can control all of us. Control you? I've sacrificed everything for this family. Then stop acting like we owe you our lives. Every time you help us, you make us look like beggars. I only wanted this family to have a better life. I've never looked down on any of you. I've spent years helping this family. Nobody asked you to. Keep your money. We're tired of your pride. You think because you have money, you're better than everyone. I was just trying to help.
What if I told you that the most dangerous thing a woman can do in this life is love her family too hard? Not hate them, not abandon them, love them. My name is Doreen, and for 11 years, I poured everything I had into the people who shared my blood, my money, my time, my sleep, my tears. I gave until my hands were empty and my heart was wrung dry. And when I finally had nothing left to give, they turned around and told me I had been doing too much. Let me take you back to where it all began. I was 31 years old when my skincare and wholesale distribution business finally crossed the line that every entrepreneur prays for. The accounts were no longer just surviving. They were breathing, expanding, multiplying. I remember the morning I looked at my bank statement and covered my mouth with both hands because the number staring back at me didn't feel real. My husband, Wilson, was standing by the bedroom door, still tying his tie, and I showed him the screen. He laughed. Then he grabbed me and spun me around the room in his work clothes, and for a moment the world smelled like his cologne and possibility. But my joy always came with a shadow. Because even as Wilson was celebrating, I was already thinking about my younger brother, Festus. He had just received his university admission letter, and our mother had called me 3 times in 1 week, her voice thin and tight the way it only got when money was the problem. Festus was the baby of our family. He had his father's forehead and our mother's stubbornness, and he wanted to study engineering. But the school fees were standing between him and everything he had ever dreamed of. I didn't hesitate. I paid it all. Tuition, accommodation, feeding allowance, even the laptop he needed for his coursework. My mother cried on the phone. She called me God's instrument. She said my late father would have been proud. I felt warm inside weeks after that. Then came my cousin Cynthia, who wanted to open a small fashion boutique but didn't have startup capital. Then Uncle Bright's hospital bills when his blood pressure landed him in a private clinic for 2 weeks. Then my Aunt Flora's rent when her landlord threatened to throw her out in January. Then my cousin Jerrison's transport business. He needed just one more vehicle to scale up, and I gave it to him because he looked me in the eye and said, "Doreen, I will never forget this." I believed him. Wilson watched all of this with quiet eyes. He never shouted at me. He never gave me ultimatums. But at night, when the house was still and we were lying side by side, he would speak in that low, careful voice he used when something was weighing heavily on his chest. "Doreen," he said one evening, "I am not telling you not to help your family, but I need you to understand something. The day may come when they will turn against you, not because they are evil, but because people who receive too much start to feel like they are owed, and once someone feels entitled, they will find a reason to resent the hand that feeds them." I kissed his cheek and told him he was being too cynical. "They are my family, Wilson, not strangers." He nodded slowly, but he didn't smile. I should have listened to the man who knew me best. Instead, I kept giving. I kept showing up. I kept carrying people who are perfectly capable of walking, but had simply learned that Doreen would carry them. Because that is the thing about being the strong one in your family. Nobody asks how you are holding up. Nobody wonders if your arms are tired. They just keep adding weight and calling it love. The first time I heard what they were saying about me behind my back, I was standing at my mother's kitchen sink washing pots after a family gathering when I heard cousin Cynthia's voice drifting in through the open window. She was outside in the yard with Jerrison and 2 other cousins whose names I will not say. They thought I was still in the sitting room. "The problem with Doreen," she said, and the sheer casualness in her voice chilled me, "is that she thinks money makes her better than everyone." My hands went still under the running water. "Exactly," Jerrison agreed. The same Jerison whose transport vehicle I had paid for with my own hard-earned money. She acts like we can't survive without her, like she's our mother or something. It's embarrassing. I stood there with soapy hands and a heart that was slowly splitting open. I had never told anyone how much I gave. I had never announced it at family meetings or posted it on social media. When I paid Festus's fees, I told him to tell no one. When I settled Uncle Bright's hospital bill, I did it quietly. But somehow, despite all of that silence, I had still become the villain. I had still become too much. I dried my hands. I walked back into the sitting room. I sat down and I smiled at every single one of them when they came back inside. But something had shifted in me, something quiet and permanent. I didn't say anything to Wilson that night. I didn't want to hear him say, "I told you so." Not because he was the kind of man who said that, but because I wasn't ready to admit that he had been right. Instead, I stared at the ceiling of our bedroom and replayed every sacrifice I had ever made for this family, like a film reel on loop. The fees, the bills, the startup money, the rent, the medication, the late-night phone calls where I reassured people, calmed fears, solved problems that had nothing to do with my own life. And now they were standing in my mother's yard calling me embarrassing. Weeks passed. The comments didn't stop, they just moved underground, spreading like termites through the walls of the family. My Aunt Flora started giving me cold greetings at church. Cynthia stopped calling me directly and started sending messages through other people. Jerison, the same man who had once knelt down and thanked me in front of his wife, started posting things on the family WhatsApp group that were clearly aimed at me, about people who think they are superior because of money, and pride coming before a fall. My mother, God bless her, tried to speak to them, but they told her she was biased because I was her daughter. The final straw came at my cousin Efe's engagement party. I had contributed money for the event, a significant amount, because Efe had come to me personally and asked. At the party, the MC was thanking contributors by name. When he called my name and the amount, I saw Cynthia lean toward the woman beside her and whisper something. Both of them looked at me and smiled the kind of smile that isn't really a smile. After the party, someone called me, a distant aunt who was too old to understand she was being used as a messenger, and said the family felt I had shown off by letting my contribution be announced publicly. I had not asked for my name to be announced. I had not even known it would be. Wilson found me sitting in the dark in our living room when he came home that night. He turned on the light. He sat beside me. He didn't say a word for a long time. Then he said, "Doreen, when last did you do something just for yourself?" I opened my mouth and I realized I didn't have an answer.
If this story is making you feel something deep in your chest right now, subscribe to Rena Tales and ring that notification bell. It wasn't a dramatic decision. There was no big speech, no family meeting, no letter. I simply stopped. I stopped offering before I was asked. I stopped responding to the veiled requests that came through extended family members. When my phone rang with numbers I recognized as need, I let it ring. Not out of revenge, not even out of anger, but out of exhaustion so deep it had settled into my bones. Wilson noticed the change in me. He didn't celebrate it. He was too wise for that. He just held my hand across the dinner table one evening and said, "Rest, Doreen. Just rest." So, I rested. I channeled everything into my business, into our marriage, into the small personal dreams I had quietly buried under everyone else's emergencies. I started taking evening walks. I started reading books again. Wilson and I began having dinner dates on Friday nights, something we hadn't done in years because every Friday had previously been swallowed by some family crisis or another. For the first time in a long time, my weekends were mine. And the family? They barely noticed at first. Or maybe they did notice and simply didn't care. The WhatsApp group carried on. The family gathering still happened. Nobody called to ask if I was okay. Nobody sent a message saying, "Doreen, we haven't heard from you. Is everything all right?" They had complained about me doing too much, and when I stopped doing too much, the silence on their end confirmed everything. I was not missed. I was only needed. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from realizing that some of the people who call you family only know how to locate you when they want something. It sits differently than ordinary loneliness. It doesn't make noise. It just settles quietly inside you, like dust on a shelf, and you only notice it when the light catches it at a certain angle. But I kept going. My business expanded into 2 new states that year. Wilson got a promotion at his firm. We began building a house outside the city, a house we had planned together, chosen together, poured our own love into. Life was good, genuinely, quietly good. Then came the phone call that would rearrange everything. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember because I was at my office reviewing delivery invoices when my phone rang with my mother's number. I answered smiling, expecting the usual checking. But the voice that came through was not my mother's voice. It was my Uncle Bright, and he was crying. "Doreen," he said, and his voice sounded like it had aged 20 years overnight. "There has been an accident." The pen in my hand dropped to the floor. "What kind of accident? Who? Where?" He told me, and I sat there in my office chair while the world I had quietly rebuilt around myself began to shake at its foundation. A fuel tanker had lost control on the highway. It had happened on a Sunday afternoon while a group of family members were returning from a naming ceremony in a neighboring state. 3 vehicles, 11 people. The tanker clipped the first car, which hit the second, which spun the third into the guardrail. By the time emergency services arrived, the scene was something none of us would ever fully recover from hearing about. My cousin Jerison was gone. Dead on impact, the doctors said, which was the only mercy in any of it. Cynthia survived, but she would spend the next 4 months in a hospital bed with a shattered pelvis and a collapsed lung. Her boutique, the one I had quietly helped her start years ago, had no business insurance, no savings buffer, nothing. It would fold within weeks. 2 other cousins were injured, one seriously enough to require months of physiotherapy. My Aunt Flora, who had been in the second vehicle, escaped with broken ribs and a deep gash along the side of her face, but the trauma broke something in her that the doctors couldn't see or stitch. And my mother? My mother had not been in any of those vehicles. She had stayed back from the naming ceremony because of a headache. When she heard the news, she collapsed in her kitchen. Not physically, but spiritually. She folded like something inside her had finally given out. I flew home the same day. I remember walking into my mother's house and finding her sitting in the corner of her room, very still, very small, staring at the wall. I sat beside her. I didn't say anything. I just took her hand, and she leaned her head on my shoulder and cried in a way I had never heard her cry before. A crying that had no sound, just trembling, just shaking like a tree in a storm. I held her for a long time. Then I stood up, and I did what Doreen has always done. I started making calls. I coordinated with the hospitals. I paid the deposits that released the injured family members into proper care. I arranged Jerrison's burial with his wife, who herself was still recovering from shock. I sorted the documentation. I handled the insurance claims that nobody else knew how to navigate. I did not do it because they deserved it. I did not do it because they had treated me well. I did it because they were my family. And because when it truly mattered, I could not be the kind of person who stood back and watched. But here is what I noticed in the quiet middle of all that chaos. There was no one else. Every relative who had opinions about my generosity, every cousin who whispered that I was showing off, every family member who made me feel like a burden for caring too much, when the real storm came, they looked around for someone to hold the umbrella, and the only person standing there was me.
The weeks that followed the accident were a study in human nature. People who had not spoken to me directly in over a year were suddenly calling my number. Not through messengers, not through my mother, directly. Their voices stripped of the edge they used to carry. The pride replaced by something that sounded like desperation, trying to disguise itself as conversation. Cynthia called me from her hospital bed. She called me on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the accident. I stared at her name on the screen for a few seconds before I answered. She started with small talk. How was I doing? How was Wilson? How was business? The kind of surface warmth people deploy when they want something but aren't sure how to ask for it. I let her talk. Then she went quiet, and in that silence, I heard everything she hadn't said yet. Doreen, she finally said, and her voice cracked just slightly. I don't know how to say this. Then say it plainly, I told her, not harshly, just honestly. She exhaled. The boutique is closing. I can't run it from a hospital bed, and I have nobody who can manage it for me. I've been thinking. I know things haven't been easy between us. I know we said things that weren't fair to you, and I'm sorry. I truly am. But I don't have anyone else, Doreen. You were always the one who knew how to fix things. There it was. You were always the one. Not a compliment, a confession. My Aunt Flora came to see me in person when she was discharged. She sat across from me in my living room, still moving carefully because of her ribs, and she looked at me the way people look at someone they have wronged and know it. She didn't say much. She mostly talked about the accident, about Jerison, about how quickly life could shift beneath your feet. But at the end, she reached across and held my hand with her rough, familiar fingers. You kept showing up even when we didn't deserve it, she said quietly. I want you to know I see that now. And then there was Festus, my baby brother, who I had paid through university, who had graduated and gotten a good job and slowly drifted into the comfortable silence of people who no longer need you. He drove 4 hours to come see me after the accident. He showed up at my door unannounced with a cooler of food his wife had made and something heavy sitting in his eyes. He sat at my kitchen table and said, Sister, I have been wanting to call you for months, not because of the accident, because I realized I hadn't been calling, and that's wrong. He looked down at his hands. You gave me everything when I had nothing, and I took it and walked away and became someone you had to read about through other people. That's not who I was raised to be. I looked at my brother, this tall, serious grown man, and I saw the boy I had once packed a bag for and put on a bus to university with money I had barely saved. I saw what love looks like when it doesn't protect itself. Festus, I said, I never did any of it to be repaid. I did it because I loved you. I still do. He nodded, but his eyes were wet. I know, he said. That's what makes it worse. That night, Wilson and I sat on our veranda long after dinner. The city was humming below us, distant and indifferent, and the sky was doing something beautiful with the last of the evening light. They are coming back, Wilson said, not triumphantly, just observationally. Yes, I said. What will you do? I thought about it for a long time, about everything I had given, about everything that had been taken for granted, about the WhatsApp group and the engagement party and Cynthia's voice from the window, about Jerison, who would never come back to apologize, about my mother, who had never stopped believing in me, even when her own children let her down. I will help them, I said, but differently this time. Wilson looked at me. Not because they need me, but because I choose to. And if that distinction ever blurs again, if they start to treat it like an entitlement again, I will step back again, quietly, without explanation. He nodded slowly. Then he smiled. That, he said, is the woman I married.